Hello, I'm Kim Elton. Welcome to the Ignition Report, sponsored by Inproheat Industries. A recent article authored by Pat Roche for the Canadian Oil Register's weekly Energy Bulletin cited the impact that new technologies will have on the economics of steam-assisted gravity drainage, SAGD. Much of the article was based on research conducted by Jared Wynveen of McDaniel and Associates, a Calgary-based consulting firm. This caught our attention here at the Ignition Report, and today we have Jared Wynveen with us to offer further insight into what these technologies are, how they can improve process efficiencies, and what that means to the future of the industry. Hi, Jared. Welcome, and thank you for joining us here at the Ignition Report.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So listen, Jared, let's start by doing a little credentials check here and tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience in the industry, and McDaniel and Associates, the work that you do there.
The company was founded in 1955. Mm-hmm. We have two offices, a main office here in Calgary and a second office in Guildford, England. We have approximately 70 technical staff here in Calgary, and our company's focus really is providing petroleum engineering services, geological studies, and economic evaluations for oil and gas assets, both here in Alberta and all around the world. As far as myself, I've been with the company since 2006. Very quickly, I went into the thermal oil sands group, and I've been with the group ever since. I'm a professional engineer with APEGA, and I work on very large companies that work in the oil sands, such as Cenovus, Nexen, ConocoPhillips, etc.
Now, you look a lot younger than that. You've been with the McDaniel for, what, 7 years now, and you look like you're 20 years old. What's going on?
Well, my wife happens to like that quite a bit because, I've been with the company almost 9 years now, and I still get the odd question within the boardroom whether or not I'm the summer student or not.
All right, the youngest guy in the room, but the most experienced. All right, so for this project, what drew you towards studying steam-assisted gravity drainage, or SAGD as we call it in the industry?
Yeah, well, really, it stemmed from the idea that it's a combination of a few things that I really like. One, there's some complex engineering at play here. The fluid dynamics and the fluid motions that are happening subsurface are really interesting. The other component that was really quite interesting to me was the fact that even as an engineer, you have to have a very good handle on the geological aspect of the reservoir. And that's not always the case with oil and gas. So for me, somebody who couldn't quite decide early on whether or not engineering or geology would have been the right way to go, this is seemingly a good combination of the two.
Okay, great. So now at the Canadian Heavy Oil Association's Fall Conference, you identified several specific technologies that represented a new future for steam-assisted gravity drainage. Can you talk for a moment about the general practice?
Sure. Well, we'll cover off some of the basics. And really, SAGD is a gravity-based process that relies on using steam injected subsurface to essentially melt bitumen. Now, what's important to note is that at reservoir conditions, bitumen is hard as a rock.
Right.
And so we need to impose some sort of energy or some sort of viscosity reducing agent to allow that bitumen to flow to the producing one. So currently, as it's applied, there are a number of assets within both Alberta and Saskatchewan that rely on really, again, this thermal reduction of viscosity, which allows the bitumen to flow at very high rates. And in fact, we're now producing in excess of 600,000 barrels a day throughout industry using SAGD.
So let's dive into these new technologies now that you shared at the conference. Can we go through these, each one, and explain the concept and how these improve SAGD technologies?
Absolutely. So I think a general comment before I go through each individual technology is that all of these major advancements in SAGD technology are based on the idea that we want to reduce the amount of thermal energy we have to invest in the ground, because thermal energy is associated with burning more natural gas and requiring more water to extract every barrel of oil. So that being said, the ultimate goal is to reduce the amount of water that we put downhole. So the first big technology that we see would be solvent-assisted SAGD. Within solvent-assisted SAGD, what they do is instead of just injecting pure steam downhole, they mix in small amounts of lighter hydrocarbon. And that could be butane, propane, even diluent is something that a lot of companies are looking at. And really, the concept behind solvent co-injection is that instead of just getting the thermal reduction of the thermal benefits on the viscosity reduction of the bitumen, you're also getting the blending viscosity reduction of having these lighter hydrocarbons mix in with these very heavy hydrocarbons. So it increases the mobility and allows better drainage to the wellbore. Now, the second technology that we see as being, in fact, even more broadly applicable than solvent-assisted SAGD would be methane co-injection, or NCG co-injection, which is non-condensable gas. Now, the big difference between NCG co-injection and solvent co-injection is that we're not looking for the gas to condense. With solvent-assisted SAGD, you're looking for that condensation of the solvent because it reduces the aggregate viscosity of the blend. In NCG co-injection, we're looking for different attributes. What we're really trying to achieve is a thermal blanket at the top of the reservoir that reduces the conductive heating losses to the overburden, which really doesn't provide any bitumen recovery. So the concept there is you can replace some of the steam with methane, and in doing so, you can achieve a more efficient SAGD operation. And then the third technology that I spoke about was infill wells or wedge wells, depending on which crowd you're running with. Now, the concept here is that mid-well pair life, you would actually go in and drill a single horizontal well in between your well pairs, and you would be able to accelerate the recovery from the undrained reservoir, because it's important to note that, say 50% through the life cycle of a well, what you'll actually see is that there's actually quite a bit of bitumen that, although not ready to flow to the producing well, it's much warmer than the ambient temperature that you would have started with. So to that end, an infill well or wedge well goes in and more quickly is able to draw that fluid out by putting in a bit of heat and then really pulling on the well quite a bit harder than you might under gravity alone. Now, the real benefit is when you start looking at combinations of two or even all three of these technologies. And that's what we're starting to see within industry, and that's where we ultimately expect a lot of companies to go. Okay. And from that perspective, the companies that are doing a combination of some of these technologies are starting to see step changes in performance.
A very quick question with a lot of information there, and we'll have to augment that perhaps with some printed information that goes along with this. But those three things, are there a lot of companies using this now, and you see this as the future?
So there are a number of companies that are at least taking steps at this point. There are companies like Cenovus or its predecessors that have been either implementing some of these technologies or working on these technologies for a very, very long time. But outside of Cenovus, there were a number of companies that have been sort of working around the edges with some of these technologies, but up until, say, a few years ago, hadn't really started to make that investment. At this point, we see a number of companies moving very heavily in this direction. So I would expect that within the next few years, we'll essentially see most of the companies at least using one or two or maybe even three of these technologies across the board.
Now, the efficiencies that you're talking about here that you could expect to achieve through these technologies certainly speaks to the bottom line and being more competitive in the marketplace, but also more responsible use of resources. Is that fair to say? A more responsible sort of use of the assets and the resources that is required to extract the bitumen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it cuts two ways. One is that we're looking at lower water usage, and that's obviously important in a water-constrained environment. Really, when we talk about the overall thermal efficiency of a process, the one number we end up dialing into is the steam-oil ratio. So if you have a steam-oil ratio of 3, that implies that you're injecting 3 barrels of cold water equivalent steam into the reservoir to get 1 barrel of bitumen back. If you're able to reduce your steam-oil ratio from 3 to 2, you've now cut your water reduction by a third. So that's quite significant. The other component is that by reducing that steam-oil ratio and increasing the efficiency, we are reducing the amount of natural gas that we have to burn. So from that perspective, it's a much better usage of resources if we can allow that gas to be used in other areas.
So that follows up with my next question, which is what kind of environmental impact these technologies will have compared to existing practices. It sounds like it's a win-win.
Absolutely. We're going to see lower water usage per barrel produced and better thermal efficiency, leading to lower natural gas burning as well, or lower natural gas usage per barrel.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear at the Ignition Report. So tell me, who are some of the companies that you see that will be the early adopters? I think you touched on this earlier, but as far as the companies who are already using these technologies and the adoption going forward, where do you see that headed?
Sure. Well, I would have to say that Cenovus has always been a leader in this field, and the first wedge wells or infill wells were drilled at Foster Creek, and they've been incredibly successful there, and the development has been hugely successful over the last 5 years. The other company I would say that in the last couple of years has really taken a huge leap forward would be Meg Energy. We're seeing that they're doing some tremendous work on both the NCG co-injection coupled with the infill wells. And they are seeing some incredible increases in thermal efficiency. The last company that I think really deserves a notable mention would be Conacher Oil and Gas. They are really going full bore ahead with solvent-assisted SAGD, and the pilot data to date suggests that the results will be very good, and the increase in economics, the profitability of that project is significant, and also the reduction on that steam oil ratio and all the associated water and gas usage that goes along there.
Well, thanks for that overview. If viewers want to know more about your company, about SAGD technologies and the things that you're studying now, where can we get more information?
Sure. Well, you can actually reach us via our website at www.mcdan.com.
All right, we'll post that here as well. Listen, it's been great to learn more about these new technologies, what you're doing in the industry, and where it's going from here. And thank you very much, Jared, for being our guest today. And thank you for joining us here at the Ignition Report.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. For more about our program, please visit ignitionreport.com. I'm Kim Elton, and thank you very much.